So I can disambiguate what an omer is right now.
Okay, good.
An omer is 1/10 of an ephah.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
Right.
Absolutely.
So also an ephah, but an ephah, if you're like, what's an ephah? An ephah is 72 logs, which is 1/60th of a maris. Thus, an omer is 3/25ths of a maris. Okay? Thus, an omer is equal to 0.96 US gallons. Except the Jewish Study Bible I was looking at says that an omer is equal to 0.61 US gallons. So a little bit more than half. So it's pretty clear, if you ask me. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Eating the Apple, the podcast where two non-believers take an honest look at the Bible. I'm Jeff.
I'm Chris.
And God's run rampage through Egypt and killed all the firstborn, like humans and animals.
Mm-hmm.
So we're ready to see what happens now that the Israelites are on the run. So without further ado, at the beginning of chapter 14, the Lord says to Moses to go tell the Israelites to turn back, camp near Pi-Haroth, and camp by the sea directly opposite Baal-Zephon. And the reason why they're doing this weird like loop back is because God's logic is that it's going to confuse Pharaoh, right? He's like, the Pharaoh's going to think they're just wandering. They don't know where they're going, right? And so
God's playing 3D, 4D chess. What's the meme?
Yeah, exactly. And then so he's got the Israelites wandering around because it's going to confuse, because it's going to make them look confused to the Pharaoh. But this is a God, so this is the God who acts. The God has already made the Pharaoh. He's already hardened his constitution, right, several times. So regardless, the Pharaoh. He requires to see certain things in order to react in certain ways. This Pharaoh. So God couldn't have just confused the Pharaoh. God couldn't have just made it to where the Pharaoh thought that the Israelites were confused. He had to show them they were confused.
Yeah.
And so, you know how whenever you first start off on a super long journey, you want to get rested, you want to get your energy, you got a bag packed full of snacks, all this other stuff. So the Israelites have already done all of that. But the first thing they're going to do is they're going to double back. You know how like whenever you leave the house and you're like, I forgot my phone charger, and you're like, screw it, we're already in the car. The Israelites are doing that very thing right now. Like, why are you walking us around in circles? And Moses has to say to him basically, it's actually, the answer is worse than any lie I could tell. So don't worry, just follow me. So the Israelites look confused to the Pharaoh, and the Lord hardens the Pharaoh's heart, and in order to pursue them.
Man, I just don't see the logic here. Like, he's hardening Pharaoh's heart again. Pharaoh chased him out. Like, he hardened Pharaoh's heart, and Pharaoh chased them out. And then, so now he's got to harden it again. Does he like get this? You know, he comes up upon the Israelite camp or whatever, and he's like, you know what? They got me this time. And God's like, no. Like, I just don't. He's already pursuing him.
Yeah, it's almost like he gets there just in time to like, oh, they escape from his grasp, and he's looking at them wandering around confused on the edges of the mountain there, where the wilderness meets the mountain. Baal-Zephon is the god of the North Mountain. That's what that means. Baal is the god, and then Zephon is the North Mountain. So he sees them wandering around over there, and he's like, like perfect. They don't know where they're going. Now I'll get my chariots going. So yeah, I mean, he's certainly in need of some his heart being hardened. It's not enough, you know. I guess now he's trying to, maybe now that everyone's dead, he's got to resolve to get back at them, I guess. Not that they had anything to do with it whatsoever.
Right.
But now that you mention it, that's interesting because we'll talk about it later, because we'll talk about it like in chapters 19 and 20. But it's almost as if God was exacting revenge on the Egyptians by the time the last couple of
we mentioned that a couple times before.
Okay. So there's really nothing. Pharaoh is almost acting as if he were God in this case, right? Not that that's a good thing, but he's not doing anything different than what, Adonai here would do, right?
Sure.
he's like, he's mad. He's like, you killed all of my firstborn. I killed all of your firstborn, throw him in the river. So you killed all of my firstborn. He's like, but we're trading blows. We're pugilists here, and I'm not
Yeah.
done.
Well, in that case, why would God need to harden his heart again?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who knows? So I'm not sure why he has to have his heart hardened, but I think it may be to reinforce the fact that God's involved here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and he says that God says to, he's still speaking to Moses. He says, he's going to gain glory for himself through Pharaoh and all of his army, and the Egyptians will know that he is the Lord. So the Israelites did this. Yeah, not to get too hung up on every little thing, but there's going to be several instances where God tells Moses to speak, and Moses goes and speaks to the Israelites, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not enough. The Israelites still need more encouragement, more, you know, some other carrot to be
Oh
dangled in
yeah.
front of them in order to act.
Yeah.
So whenever we get texts like this in 12 or in 14:4, where he says, "So the Israelites did this," like there's no connective tissue there. Just because the Lord said it doesn't mean that the Israelites do it. You could say that the Israelites did it, but it's not because necessarily
Right.
it was spoken. Therefore, that doesn't always
There's
follow. That doesn't always track.
there's so many different like instances where you know the, the Egyptians, not the Egyptians, the Israelites have been shown time and time again that this is God, this is God's power, he's the he's their God, all this stuff, and yet they immediately turn around and are like, ah man, but I'm hungry now, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is.
Yeah,
They're just ready to abandon him at a drop of a hat, and I don't understand it. I really don't.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if only it must have something to do with the fact that what we're supposed to glean from that, I would suppose, is that we're just we're driven by base instincts or something, and that we need constant reinforcement of like the Lord's presence or whatever in order to maintain a certain kind of track, or
I
I don't
mean,
know.
yeah, I could see that if it was just a guy, Moses, you know what I mean? Like if he was some charismatic leader and he's convincing these people, but he's got the power of God behind him.
Mm-hmm.
It's been demonstrated time and time again, and it'll continue to be demonstrated, and they
We're not
continue
done
to
demonstrating it.
turn away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so interesting, and that you know, as we're reading this, I'm constantly confounded by. I'm like, are we still doing this? Like, why is this not enough? You know what I mean? Like, and granted, so if we were to apply this to a modern lens, like, say you and I were like having these struggles with our faith, we might need constant, bashings over the head with this type of reinforcement, and it might need to come in different ways, just like it has here. There's different ways that God has shown Himself. We might need that, so I'm willing to grant that. But
See,
again,
but
this is what's been.
well, I was just gonna say, in my view, like if I was in that same situation, instead of saying I would need this to be, to keep me going or whatever, like I see it more of I might need some encouragement to stay on the right path or to know which path is the right path.
But
But
not to know that God's there.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, that's my point.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Um. Yeah, and so yeah, I can see that being the case too. So, the king, the king was told that they fled, and so the Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We've let the Israelites go and we've lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. So the Pharaoh's going. The Pharaoh's going on this trek, right? He took 600 of his best chariots.
Yeah, it says he took 600 of his best chariots plus all the other chariots of Egypt. Like,
So just say he took all of his best chariots. He,
exactly.
he took
Just
all of his
all the
chariots,
chariots.
600 of which were pretty good. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with the crap chariots, and
Yeah.
the officers all with officers all over them. And the Lord hardened the Pharaoh's heart. And here in verse 8, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. They were,
Yeah,
they were
so
marching to a beat.
I had a note about that as well. I believe, yeah, the JPS version says they're leaving defiantly. I think the original Hebrew was right, like with a high hand,
Mm-hmm.
and it just means deliberately, like with
Mm-hmm.
intent of purpose. So
Okay.
uh, there's that. But my question on that is like they're going out. it says with a high hand, and it means boldly or defiantly or whatever. If God had just liberated me in this situation, I'd be celebrating. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I, I,
Yeah. Maybe they've been instructed to not show too much, elation just yet. We have to. We're not through the hard part.
maybe.
And yeah, I'm
Yeah.
seeing a note here in by Rashi that says that with a high hand, with lofty and openly displayed might. So
Yeah, because
yeah,
there's a
that's
lot of other instances where, uh, the punishment for a crime is different if you're doing it with a high hand kind of thing,
mm-hmm.
um, with intent.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the Egyptians, all of their horses and chariots and horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-haroth opposite Baal-zephon. So that's the place where they doubled back. So that's where they looked confused, and sure enough, that's where the Egyptians caught the Israelites. As the Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They skipped Moses. They were like, "Oh, I'm sorry." They cried out to the Lord by saying to Moses,
Mm-hmm.
"Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt?" I love that. That's some good. I love how there's these little jokey type things in here. It's so funny.
Yeah, yeah.
Was the ground too hard to dig in Egypt? That's good stuff.
But I mean, there's supposed to be what 2 million of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Isn't
yeah,
that supposed to be more than the population of Egypt at the time? So why are they that scared of? You know?
yeah. That's a good. There's some unfortunate history that where just having strength in numbers isn't always enough.
Well, that's true, but like, I don't know. It's lopsided.
Yeah, I agree. Um, didn't you say it in verse 12? Didn't you say to us in Egypt, "Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians"? I'm sorry. Edit verse 12. Didn't we say to you in Egypt, "Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians"? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. And Moses says to him, he says, "Don't be afraid, stand firm, and you'll see the deliverance that the Lord is willing to bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you'll never see again. The Lord will fight for you. Just be still."
So
And
that
yep.
I thought was interesting because of the different translations that I've been going through.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them say you only have to keep still, and then let's see, where is it? I should have had it
JPS should say.
prepared.
I think the JPS says silent.
Hold your peace.
Mm.
So, how did I put that? Why did they need to take all of the swords? It says they were like, it doesn't necessarily say that they took all the weaponry, but when they looted Egypt, but there are other hints at it. They're an army and they're prepared for war, and eventually they are going to get into a battle, so they have to have at least some weapons. You know, assuming being slaves in Egypt, they didn't have that to begin with. Why did they take that stuff and then just not need it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, very interesting point. Um, picking back up on 15, the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch your hand out over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so they will go in after you, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all of his army through his chariots and horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I'm the Lord when I gain glory through the Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen."
Well, if he's destroying everybody in the Pharaoh, then how are the rest of the Egyptians going to know? Like, who's going
I
to go back
mean,
and report it?
well, maybe it's because there's no one to come back that they're like,
I
"Oh,
guess.
geez, like that's no good." So there was a chiasm here, and
Oh, I forgot to check into that.
it's an interesting one. So I think it's verse. Where is it? It says, "Why have you done this? Why have we done this that we have let Israel go from serving us?" When the Egyptians, or when the Pharaoh says that, that's the center of the chiasm. Um, it's, "Why have we done this that we've let Israel go from serving us?" And then the previous two, the two adjacent verses are
Mhm.
the Pharaoh and of his servants, and took his people with him. I'm not sure the connection there. And the ones outside of that are, "I will harden the Pharaoh's heart that he shall follow after them, and the Lord hardened the heart Pharaoh of the king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel." So I can see that one makes more sense than Pharaoh and his servants took his people. Oh, I guess Pharaoh and his servants and took his people with him. Okay, yeah, his people and his servants. That makes sense. But yeah, the center of the chiasm there is why have we done this that we've let Israel go from serving us? So like that's a that center chiastic piece of scripture there is important in that it's a major plot point. It's a big deal that the Pharaoh is like, hold on, time out, let's go get him. So we were moving on to so like you said, they're who's gonna go report this, right? And and God seems to have this thing where why does he have to mention to the Israelites that he's going to be, you know, uh, he's going to gain glory through these actions to the Israelites? Like, okay, what do I care? I'm looking out. I want to not die. I don't want to be enslaved again. Cool, get your glory, but like, which direction? Become a pillar of smoke so we can follow you, and because I don't care that you're getting glory right now. It's interesting that he says that twice. He's like, I'm going to harden you, and they're going to go in after you, and I'm going to get some glory. And
And there's
by the way,
lots of times that God's been.
well, and get your glory, go for it. But why is that in your message to like time's a wasted? And Moses is like, he's like, what do you guys say, God? And he's like, hold on, Israelites. So God's talking to me, and he's gonna go back. And he's like, and then he said something about gaining glory for himself. And the Israelites are like, okay, cool.
And so you brought up a good point there, in that Moses being the intermediary. Is God like? Does he go somewhere to talk to God? Is it all in his head? Can the other Israelites at least tell that something's been going on?
God's Moses' eyes roll back in his head just for oh wait, he's talking to God. So no, later in chapter 19 or 20 or something, Moses goes and talks to Pharaoh, or he goes and talks to
Oh
God,
yeah.
but he goes into the dark thickness of the mountain, and like that's where he's talking to God or whatever. So there's like a physical thing happening. There's a manifestation somehow, and whenever he talks to
Well,
God, there always has been.
right. I'm just trying to figure out like the logistics of this. Is it like, does he have to go away? How far does he have to go away? How much time does this take for like him to get this message and bring it back and
Yeah,
disseminate it to 2 million people?
yeah, no doubt. Yeah,
I mean,
dude, I keep forgetting about how you can't get that much information. Like people don't want to check their Amber Alerts. Like, how are you supposed to tell 2 million people in the desert that God said, "Let's go"? You just have to hope everyone's holding hands, like sword in one hand, your buddies, your buddy in the other.
I can't tell you how many times I was in the Navy. I was on a ship, and we had a couple hundred people on the ship, and out of nowhere, it'd be like, "Hey, come on, we got to go do this thing." It's like it'd been planned and disseminated, but didn't get to everybody. So we just kind of had to go along with it. You know
I
what I
mean,
mean?
maybe
And
that's what's
that's
happening
not.
here.
That's just a couple of hundred people. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah, yeah. No, that's true. Okay. Okay. So here we go. The angel of God, who'd been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. A pillar of cloud also moved in front and stood behind them. Moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other, so that neither went near the other all night long. So
So,
there's God.
well, all right, yeah, well, but there's different versions of this. One of them just says it lit up the night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that one says illuminated the night, and then JPS has. Oh, yeah, this is interesting. I wanted to talk about this. It says in the JPS that it cast us. Okay, the words are, "Thus there was a cloud. There was the cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell upon the night, so that no one could come near the other one all through the night."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was interesting. Cast a spell, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I looked up this. We had the rabbi on, and one of the books that he wrote is called the Encyclopedia of Jewish Myth, Magic, and Mysticism. And so I looked it up in there, and did I bookmark it properly? So I looked it up, and there was a bunch of different ways to put it, I guess, but the main thing being like it was a curse, not necessarily casting a spell, but it was specifically a curse. He cursed the night to make this happen. And his encyclopedia here says that a curse is a verbal invocation to bring harm or whatever other, purpose that God wanted. So I just think is an interesting thought that this cloud moves back behind them and then speaks into the ether and makes this happen.
Hmm.
That was just an interesting thought to me.
Yeah, that's very cool. Why did we lose that version through the translations?
I don't
I
know.
wonder. I wonder if it just doesn't fit certain narratives as the translations get codified and what's it called, chartered. They're like
Yeah.
they don't deem it important.
Yeah, there's a note in the JPS version that says cast a spell or curse. Others have and it lit up. So that kind of makes sense why the other versions have, put up that they lit up the night or lit up half of the night.
Hmm.
Um, it kind of makes a little bit of sense, but I like this idea that it's a curse.
Hmm.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Um, so there's a not to continue to get hung up on this sort of these words or this the terminology they use here. But in 19, when it says the angel of God who was traveling in front withdrew and went behind them, is the angel of God God, or is it a segment of God that gets to act?
I I think often, like I've said before, that what I learned is that it's ambiguous. Could be either. And in this case, I think earlier it mentioned that God was going before them as a pillar of fire by day and a cloud, or a cloud of smoke by night, by day, and a pillar of fire by night, so that they could see. So in this
Mm-hmm.
case, I think saying angel of God might be kind of just a way to distance themselves a little bit more from saying the name of God, which they're not supposed to do.
Okay.
um, but I think it's God that's doing this, not an angel specifically.
Okay. So that's neat. Okay, let's keep that in mind. You think it's God, right? Not an angel. So that makes sense. Okay. So then after this, so throughout the night, so the Israelites are allowed to keep on marching because they have light. The Egyptians are confused and confounded because there's nothing but smoke in front of them and it's dark. It's nighttime, right? They didn't have street lamps. The So Moses stretched his hand out over the sea after that night, and all the night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. So there's God present in that pillar.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad you said it that way. I'm glad you said what you said a second ago, because that basically confirms it there, that God is present as the angel of God. So when they say angel of God, they're essentially saying a version of God that's acting as a physical corporeal thing, right?
Could be, yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean that's okay.
it, it's hard for me to tell, what the meaning is in terms of it being, is it God in his natural state, or is he taking some kind of corporeal form, or is it some kind of hybrid or whatever? I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I don't think it matters too much, but it
Okay.
might.
Fair enough. Um, and you had a note about you were wondering about 23, where it says the Egyptians pursued them and all the pharaohs and horses and chariots followed them into the sea.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you were wondering?
I was just wondering if it's, it says he took 600 chariots and then all the rest of the chariots. So I can assume it's all the chariots of Egypt going into the sea. But is this like also supposed to be Egypt's entire fighting force, or did he just take a division or two of his, fighting force? So, like, how many people are going to be left in Egypt to defend it, or whatever the case may be? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it says in 7 that he took 600 of the best chariots along with the other chariots with officers over all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So you would need chariot drivers. You would need, like, a chariot's more than just one person, isn't it? Like there's someone to drive it and then other people to work weapons.
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, there's several. 600 times 3 is 1800 plus however many all the other chariots times 3, right? So that's a pretty large fighting force, and they're all just.
Right. Well, I'm not talking about the size of it necessarily. I'm just, like I said, I'm
Mm.
trying to figure out if anybody was left. You know what I mean?
Oh, I see. Back in Egypt, yeah.
Exactly.
Hmm. If they were, they didn't have any chariots. Um.
Yeah, like
So
it seems odd that they would take all the chariots, like take all of the chariots. I don't know.
yeah. So okay, and then in 25, God physically jams the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving them. Um. And then at that point, the Egyptians were like, let's get away from these Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. They didn't notice. I guess they didn't notice the fact that there were walls of water on each side. That
Or
Like
that
they're like,
God had been with them this entire time doing all these miracles, and
I had a note about that earlier, which was when God wanted to. He's like, now I'll show the Egyptians that I mean business or whatever, and they're like, how like this is going to do it? Something that happens outside of where they are. That, like you mentioned, they won't even know this happened until no one returns. Where's Pharaoh? Where's all the officers and all of our chariots? That's going to do it. But killing all of the firstborn out of nowhere, all of their animals, all these other plagues, you're telling me that like it's not going to hit them until friggin' the officers don't return? And how many of these officers were stricken by the firstborn thing? Like you're
yeah,
telling me
yeah,
that your army wasn't in complete disarray whenever the firstborn were killed? You're like, you would have had to go through like, deputizing officers left and right before you left. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
How many of them have training to be on a chariot in the first place?
Exactly. You know how to whip a horse? What's a horse? Their horses are dead. Like, how in the heck did they drive the chariots? I mean, come on, man. Jeez Louise. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Um. So so now the Egyptians are scared. They're like, all right, let's get out of this weird dry water wall place because the Lord is fighting for them against us. The Lord is mad. And the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. And Moses was like, why don't you do that? Do you want me to
Yeah.
kill them?
What's the timing? Like, did God tell him
Yeah.
do it now?
Well, he had to wait till their wheels were jammed. I don't know. How did he
Yeah.
jam them? Like, he just stuck
It would,
sticks. Everyone's like, where do these sticks come from?
they just get mud in them.
Yeah,
They're
that's true.
they're
That's
they're,
probably it.
they're ruts and
Well, no, it's dry land. There's no mud.
define dry.
That's true. Muddy. That's how I define dry. Moses stretched out his hand, sure enough, over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back into its place. So there you go. I guess it was still nighttime. It was like early morning. Moses did the waved his hand, and I suppose nothing happened because it's at daybreak that the sea went back into place.
Or maybe it was daybreak that he,
Right then,
did the thing.
yeah, the Egyptians were fleeing. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army. The entire army. There's your answer. Oh no, that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and their left. So there's a chiasm in there. There has to be, because we've already heard that. And the day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, or that day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. The Egyptians saw and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. So there you go. He's gained their trust. We'll never have to worry about that again.
Where did I've got so many links here?
So the chiasm there, are you looking for the chiasm?
Yeah. Did you pull it up already?
Yeah, I've got the page open.
Okay.
So there's no, it's weird. The center chiasm is Moses stretching out his hand over the sea, and then Moses stretched his hand forth over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength. So that it's 26 and 27 are the center verses. The Lord said, stretch your hand over the sea so the waters may flow. And then Moses stretched his hand out over the sea and the waters went back into place. Yeah. And so like all those other, the children of Israel walking upon dry land in 29 correlates to 21, where it says the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon dry ground. And then there's chariots and then the Egyptians saying, let us flee from the face of Israel. And then the Egyptians fleeing. So yeah,
So the center is the dry ground.
the center is 26 and 27. It's a dual chiasm, or it's a dual verse chiasm, where 26, the Lord tells Moses to stretch his hand out over the sea, and then in 27, Moses does that. There's no like center
So that
thing, I guess.
it almost makes me wonder if this is an intentional chiasm or just something that somebody found and was like, "Oh, gotta be a meaning there," because it's
I
not
mean, these are
obvious to me.
really. To me, it stuck out. It stuck out pretty strongly.
Well, it may have been relatively obvious and stand out because of the structure of it or whatever, but like, why is stretching your hand out over the sea the important part?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I guess because this is You could deem it important because this is God telling Moses to act, and it's through Moses' actions that that this sort of crux happens. This very important
So I
thing.
guess maybe it's kind of cementing Moses as this prophet
Further
rather
cementing him, yeah.
than God's being the one doing it.
Uh, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's certainly an interpretation.
Okay.
I can see that. Or just basically, yeah, just saying, just if you were to read those two verses, 26 and 27, God said, "Hey, Moses, do this." Moses did it, and the thing God said would happen happens. Um, but I mean, that's not the, these chiasms. They're just like little puzzles, little things to look into. They're not. It's not there, in my opinion, to like be more proof of anything. You know what I mean? Like the words speak for themselves, right? This is the holy book. These are all supposed to be things that we believe.
Mm-hmm.
So this doesn't add anything to that except to say, oh, that's interesting how it's been, structured this way, and so it adds a little bit of poetry to it, I guess.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So did you have any other notes on 14 before we move on to the Song of Moses and Miriam?
I just think that at the end, verse 31, Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians, so the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and his servant Moses. And
They never doubted him again.
exactly.
Yeah, man. What I got a note from a friend who told me to on the podcast, who said that we need to look out for themes,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to recognize when God is acting. Okay, and so I've taken that to heart a little bit. I've gone back and listened to some of our previous recordings, and I'm wondering why it seems like we haven't done that. And it's true. I can see that. So why do we need, especially in Exodus, this constant repetition of God said this, Moses did this, the thing happens. It happens so many times. We're almost being hit over the head with it.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's extremely repetitive. And what else to say about that? Is the what's the conceit? You tell me it once and I believe you because this is the holy book. You say it again and I say, no, I understand you. You say it 20 times and I'm like, why are you saying this over and over? Like, why am I still here? I'm crazy for even being here listening to this, let alone, you know, looking for more depth in this. Like, it's just the same thing. And that sounds like a harsh criticism, but I mean, we're reading it, you know what I mean? Like we're here
Okay.
trying to analyze it.
I don't understand. So if I'm missing things when God is moving,
Okay.
that's one thing. But I don't understand, what am I supposed to be looking for? Am I just supposed to keep it in mind for the future, or
Right.
or is it saying that we're missing something because we're ignoring this?
I would assume that I didn't really pick it the comment. I thought it was I just because to me it's better left vague. Well, I guess I picked out enough to get the additional criticism that we need to look out for. We need to watch for a God who acts. And
Okay.
but there's a more general point in there, that there are themes at play that could help enrich our experience and kind of add to the text, I guess. So I have been and will be looking out for those types of things as I read and as we discuss it.
Yeah,
But
I'll definitely keep it in mind. But if you wouldn't mind going back and asking if he can be a little more specific, or she can be a little more specific. I don't know who it was.
okay,
Just for my sake.
well, and I bring it up here because you have all the information I have at this point, right?
Right.
Um, I bring it up here because we've gotten to the point now through 14, like so things are about to change a little bit. The song of Moses and Miriam it's a rejoicing, it's an exultant song of, look at this God that has delivered us from
Hmm.
slavery or whatever, right? Or at least the first part of it. But this isn't the last of the Israelites doubting their
Yeah,
belief, or their
exactly.
just right. So
Yeah.
at this point I'm kind of at a loss, like, to take that criticism to heart. We've gotten, for the first 14 chapters of Exodus, we've gotten this like incredibly repetitious story, and it's not and no one's learned anything yet. No, it hasn't served any purpose except to get the Israelites out of Egypt. They aren't done growing in their faith, or whatever you want to call it, growing in their belief in Adonai. And the Egyptians are just left wrecked, and they were given chances and accepted those chances. The Egyptians, I might have said Israelites. The Egyptians were given every chance to accept their fate, and they eventually did, and it still wasn't enough. So what are we supposed to take from that?
Right.
I'm gonna
Well, I mean, you can also look at it in terms of, if we're looking for God moving, God's the one that put them in Egypt in the first place. You know what I
yes.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my confusion. I'm not sure exactly what we're supposed to be taking from it, because if we're looking for God moving, I can see God moving in a lot of ways that I don't think a God should be moving.
Yeah. I said something there, and I realized that might be something to pick up on, is that sometimes it's not enough. It wasn't enough for the Egyptians, for the Pharaoh, and it's not enough for the Israelites. No matter how much God does for these people or to these people, sometimes it's just not enough. People like Pharaoh's like, no, that's not enough for me. I'm going to pursue you. I'm going to do these other things. Granted, God hardened his heart. I'm not saying that, but even then, the Egyptian, it's not so much about Pharaoh anymore. God wants to exert his thumb on the Egyptians, right? He's like, the
Mhm.
Egyptians will know, right? And so, um, and then with the Israelites, they're like they're exultant, they're rejoicing. Oh, thank you, God, you've helped us escape the Egyptians, but not enough for them to not build a golden idol. You know what I mean? Like they're still going to doubt. But here we go, right in the middle of this whole chapter, this whole experience. We get this exultant song from a character we haven't even met yet, right? Or did we meet her? Did we meet Miriam whenever Moses was a child by name?
Miriam, I believe Miriam's the one that was talking with the uh,
The
when
princess?
right, you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
I think that was Miriam that was in that, but
I
I
think
don't
so
think
too.
we've had anything else from
But
her.
did we know her by name? They didn't name her then, did they?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
That's why I
So
say I think that's her.
yeah,
I'm
I
pretty
mean,
sure.
a lot of what I've read about Miriam is that that was her, and that they call her a prophetess. I'm not sure if they call her that here in the book, but she's a prophet. She's considered a prophetess of the Lord. So Moses is too. Like they're both equal. They're on equal footing, and they. I guess if God speaks to you, then you're a prophet. But all we get from Miriam is this song, but it requires all this explication from sages and rabbis in centuries hence that to really dig, you know, exalt. What's the word? Like exhume the bones of Miriam's, profiteering, so to speak. But we don't get that here. And that's frustrating to me. But anyway.
Yeah, well, even if you take like a meta view of this and say that this is admittedly, a myth that is being inspired by God for us today, or
Mm-hmm.
for everyone post Christ or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
it's not being told in a very good way. Like, watching God move in all this makes even less sense when it comes to us, because it's not convincing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, you have to be already a believer for this to have any, impact on your belief. I
Mm-hmm.
think, at least so far with me, I'm not trying to avoid being moved by this. I'm not, you know, looking for it to disprove it or anything. I'm just reading it and taking it as I take it. And I'm doing a lot of research on it too that I wouldn't have done in the past, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
moving me at all. It
Sure.
really isn't.
Yeah, and it's funny when you put it like that. I feel like the more I read about it, the less I know about it, the more questions I have.
Yeah.
And when people will say, I'll talk to people about it. I'll ask them their opinions on the scripture and like their beliefs and things like that, and they'll say they speak glowingly. They hardly ever have any criticism of the text itself. And I ask them, "Do you read these other things? Like, you're telling me that what the Bible says is enough?" And they'll say, "Well, that's not to say that it's not without its contradictions." And I'll say, "Well, then did you ever explore those contradictions? Like, what do you have to say about what do you think about these things or these things?" And they'll say, "Oh, I haven't gotten into that yet, or whatever. And it's like, well, then how far do you got to dig to get the thing that makes sense? You know what I mean? If you come to it from a perspective of I'm going to believe this, then yeah, you're going to believe it. You know what I mean? But if you're coming anything worth believing, like this stuff should withstand the minimal critical, application that we're giving it. And yet here we are, like, excuse me, like, and we're just two dum dums, So I don't know, man. I appreciate you going over that with me because it's something that I just can't stop getting stuck with, getting stuck on as I read this. Do you are you good to go with 15?
Yeah, we can move on.
Okay.
Yeah, my first note is just that everybody broke out into song and knew the words.
Yeah. So I've been reading the Bible, but at this point I'm going to sing. Okay, just kidding.
I was about to say, can I take my headphones off?
Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted, both horse and driver he is hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my defense, and he's become my salvation. He's my God. I will praise him. My father's God. I will exalt him. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. And again, whenever we're saying the Lord, it's the Hebrew characters are Yod He Vov He. That's the Yahweh that we have nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord is my strength and my defense. He's become my salvation. We've already gone over that. Verse 4, Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has hurled into the sea. The best of Pharaoh's officers are drowned in the Red Sea. The deep waters have covered him. They sank to the depths like a stone. Your right hand, Lord, was majestic in power. Your right hand, Lord, shattered the enemy. So that's one thing to keep in mind with his right hand. Well, we've already talked about his right hand.
Hand of action.
The hand of action. That's right. And also, whenever the 10 Commandments are delivered on tablets, it's also assumed that he wrote them with his right hand, the finger of his right hand. In the greatness of your majesty, you threw down those who opposed you. You unleashed your burning anger. It consumed them like stubble. By the blast of your nostrils, the water piled up. So that's the nostril blast. That's the east wind, right? That's the wind that separated the sea. The surging waters stood like a wall. The deep waters congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy boasted, I will pursue, I will overtake them, I will divide the spoils, I will gorge myself on them. Now keep in mind, these spoils are really just all their crap. Like, the Egyptians are coming to get their stuff. And so, it's not really spoils if someone steals my truck and I go and get it back. It's like, those aren't their spoils, right? Those aren't my spoils.
Free truck.
Yeah. Oh man. I will gorge myself on them. I will draw my sword, and my hand will destroy them. But you blew your breath, and the sea covered them. Interesting that we did. Did we get a west wind that covered them? The east wind separated. Did the west wind cover them?
No, I think coming up in the song, I believe it says something about the west wind, but in the original, like what we've already gone over, it did not say the west wind.
Okay.
But one thing I thought it was interesting in verse 9 of this, in the NRSV, it says, I will divide the spoil, my desire shall have its fill of them. And I just thought that was a really fun way of putting
I will. My desire will have its fill of them. Wow. Yeah. What does that mean?
It's just a very poetic way of saying, I will destroy them utterly. I will have my vengeance in totality, kind of.
Interesting.
That's the way I take it. It's poetic and I like it. I've heard that this is, written beautifully, and it's one of the oldest passages in the Bible.
Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah.
And I don't get it. I can understand that at the time maybe it was very beautiful and it was a masterpiece, but it doesn't translate to me today.
Oh, interesting.
The beauty of it, that is.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not none of that sticks out to me at all. The beauty and all of that. Like I can start to see the edges of the poetry kind of poke out, and I get that, and it helps me to kind of see what other folks are talking about. But when it comes to this song, the context you just put it in being one of the oldest, this in the book of what's it called, the Song of Deborah, is that what it's called?
Yeah, I believe so.
Those are two of the oldest parts of the Bible, and that's so neat because they're both like literally poems, right? And it makes sense that some of the oldest parts to survive are parts that are written in verse, because easier to remember song lyrics than it is to remember, say, some prose that's been dictated to you. And I think that's a really neat thing, because it's very clear, if that being the case, that these are some of the oldest parts of the Bible, that these are some of the oldest remembered parts, given that they're written in verse.
Well, just the language that they use, from what I understand, is how they're determined to be the oldest parts. It's
Right.
very archaic compared to the rest of it.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, that book that Friedman wrote about the Exodus, he says in there that the Bible is important because it was the first kind of narrative story
Right.
of its kind, and so uh, it may have been that these things were just kind of folk tales and popular songs, and then they got incorporated in.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely, 100%, and that really makes sense to me. So you blew your breath, and the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who among the gods is like you, Lord? So there's a they are acknowledging that there are other gods, right?
Well, so it doesn't acknowledge that there are actual other gods. It acknowledges that the Israelites believe that there are other gods out there.
Right,
They
right.
may not believe that the other gods have power, but they know that these
Mm-hmm.
other gods exist, at least in
Mm-hmm.
terms of people
Mm-hmm.
worship them.
Sure, yeah, and yeah, exactly.
But what stands out to me most is that it demonstrates that the Israelites should know that God is supreme and they should not fall away at the drop of a hat again. You know what I mean?
100%.
Yeah, it's like when Pharaoh asked Moses to ask God to stop whatever plague. It's acknowledgement that God's supreme.
Right.
They should know.
So I had that exact note in for 1511, still having the debate over which god is stronger.
Yeah,
Um, who is like you who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders. You stretch out your right hand, and the earth swallows your enemies. In your unfailing love, you will lead your people, the people you have redeemed. In your strength, you will guide them to your holy dwelling.
but they're
Interesting,
not there yet. Yeah,
right? Interesting.
yeah.
That's interesting that they would put that there. The nations will hear and tremble. Anguish will grip the people of Philistia. The chiefs of Edom will be terrified. The leaders of Moab will be seized with trembling. The people of Canaan will melt away. Terror and dread will fall on them. By the power of your arm, they will be as still as a stone until your people pass by, Lord. Until the people you bought pass by. He bought them.
So,
Interesting.
but they don't pass by. You know what I mean? They wander in the wilderness for a while, and then they go, and the peoples of the area are not terrified. They fight them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I just, it's a little nitpicky, but
yeah. So you will bring them in and plant them on the mountain of your inheritance. The place, Lord, you're made for your dwelling. The sanctuary, Lord, your hands established. The Lord reigns forever and ever.
so I've
So
got
that's
notes coming up on other stuff as well that are similar, but it speaks to me. Verse 17 talks about planting them on the mountain, but he doesn't. They go to the mountain of God, which is Sinai, or whatever you want to call it, Mount Horeb, wherever it is. But they go there. That's God's mountain, but it's not where God's gonna dwell. It's not where they're gonna establish things. It's not in the Holy Land. So it's odd. Like
hmm.
how does that work?
Yeah. God always. So remember, I mean, so I keep smacking my lips. God is he appears to Moses in the form of a mountain, right? They leave him in Mount Horeb, and then they go to. Is that the same as Mount Sinai? Is that the same thing? It's not. Is it?
I believe it is.
Okay. Yeah. So and God mentions earlier that one of his previous incarnations, or one of the previous names by which he was known, was El Shaddai, meaning God of the mountain or God of the wilderness. So it's almost an acknowledgement that this is a God that it dwells in large formations like that. I haven't gotten to that. I haven't gotten to the thing you're talking about yet, but that's. I wonder if there's some sort of um, what's the word, like a skeletal remain there.
Right, right. I mean, it's spoiler alert, but they're about to go to the mountain of God, and that's where God talks to Moses and hands down the Ten Commandments and stuff. And there's a little bit of a funny thing about where they go and how they get there and timing and stuff that we'll get to. But at, it's, I mean, it's supposed to be the same place where Moses encountered God with the burning bush.
Yep.
Is the mountain of God. This is his holy place. And it references it in this song.
Yep.
But that's not the place, that they end up. It's not the place where God ends up. So, like, how holy is the mountain? What's the purpose?
Right.
It's confusing to me.
I mean, God owns multiple tracts of land. He owns Canaan. He's got this
Great
mountain.
big tracts of land.
Yeah. Yeah. So 19. When Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen went into the sea, the Lord brought the waters of the sea back over them, but the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. Then Miriam, first time we're hearing Miriam's name, hearing of Miriam by name. Miriam, the prophet, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her.
Isn't she Moses' sister as well?
Yeah. So, okay, by intoning Aaron here, we're to know that she is a part of that Levite lineage, right? So she was raised by the same people as Aaron, right? So they're all still siblings, but it's because we mention Aaron here that we're to see Miriam in the same light. Again,
Okay, that's
a
interesting.
Levite prophetess.
It just seems like if they're trying to set up Moses as the big, the big prophet guy, they would tie her to him directly. But I guess that makes sense, since he was not with them for most of his life. That
right,
I can see that.
That's the way I've read it anyway.
Okay.
So Miriam saying to them, "Sing to the Lord, for He is highly exalted; both horse and driver He has hurled into the sea." And people were like, "That's a good song." And the waters of so in 22, then Moses led Israel. Are you whistling?
No, that's
it's a puppy. Oh, okay, gotcha. Is she okay?
What's the matter, baby? What is it that you want? Just give me a second.
Yeah, take your time. I'm gonna take a sip.
I'm gonna take a pee as well. Is you okay, baby? I will take this donut off and lick it. Going right back. Oh, okay. All right, Jeff. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna pee.
All right, take your time.
Okay, I think we're ready to go again.
Okay. So
where were we?
I think we were on 22. So 15:22. Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went to the desert of Shur. For 3 days, they traveled in the desert. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, real quick. So I want to come back to that, but let's talk about Miriam real quick. She's considered a prophetess, but if I were to tell you that Moses was a prophet, you would understand why. If Aaron was a prophet, you can kind of see that, even though I can't remember if God spoke directly to Aaron. He must have, because Aaron was sent.
Yeah, at least in that respect, he was. Yeah, said the Lord called him, but it specifically says that Aaron was a prophet to Moses the way Moses was a prophet to God.
Okay, perfect. How was Miriam a prophet then? Do we know anything about that? Have you looked into that?
No, not yet. That one documentary we watched had her having a much larger role than what's written in terms of getting the Israelites to follow Moses, but that was not supported by the text in any way. So,
okay. Well, I will. So in the Foreman Parsha companion, he discusses. He goes into it. He goes into what makes Miriam so great, and apparently, her prophecy was to say that unto her mother will be born a prophet to God. Moses will end up being a prophet. Okay. Oh, poor baby.
My bad.
No, it's okay. So, as I was saying, she prophesied that Aaron, or that Moses would be a prophet to God.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Poor baby. She is sad.
I don't know what she wants.
She wants to not wear that donut.
Okay, it'll just be just a minute. I'm going to have the big dogs put in their kennels, and I'm going to let Serb sit in the living room with them. So hopefully that'll be. I know you're upset. She was whining. I don't know what she wants, so I'm going to have Sid sit with her for a little bit. Love y'all. Yeah, just put it back the way it was. Okay, we should be good. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. No, it's understandable. Okay, so as I was saying, Foreman in his Parsha companion goes into what makes Miriam a prophetess, and it's through like Talmudic sages and years of rabbinical dialectic
Right.
that they determined that she was so her prophecy was that Moses was going to be born to Jochebed, and what was her dad's name? Oh man, what was her dad's
I
name?
don't remember.
Amram.
Yeah.
Amram and Jochebed. Moses was going to be born to them, and he was going to be a prophet. He was going to speak for God. And when Moses was born, so Miriam said the light of God will be shown through him. And when he was born, his mother's birth canal literally exploded with light, and when he was born, light lit the room. So they knew then that she was a prophet, right? She was I don't know how old she was, how much older she is than Moses, but it's some not non-zero number, and she so from then she was kind of like deemed important to the whole story, right? And further down the line, and the reason why she's here now, because throughout all of those years of her being considered a prophet, she is basically responsible for the women. She is the one who leads the women, teaches them Torah, things like that. And I think we're going to get more Miriam later, right? Like, does
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
come back? Okay, good.
I
I don't
believe
know.
so.
I don't know if she comes back in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and stuff. But we get so she's like I said, she's in charge of the women. So we basically get the story of we're told about the one lady that's in charge of teaching the lady Hebrews the Torah, right? So that's what I read about her being considered a prophet. But like you said, it's
So when
never
did she
discussed in the
teach?
text.
When was she supposed to teach the ladies? Is this before Moses?
No, so the
I was
Torah,
about to say because the Torah comes from Moses, right?
yeah. So the right, so it's the mitzvot, all of the rules, right, of the Torah that Moses is going to be start delineating later on, after
Mm-hmm.
the Ten Commandments and further, Leviticus and such. That she basically has to translate to like a female context, right? Because like unclean is different for men than it is for women, right? So she basically gets to interpolate what Moses says, give it to the ladies in their
I see.
version, right? So, but I'll be honest, I haven't even gone past, um, I haven't even gotten past Exodus, so I don't know what she
Yeah,
does later, if anything. So
I haven't either. I said before that I've read the entire Bible, and I'm positive that I have because I remember I remember bits and pieces of doing it, but I'm wondering if maybe I did it kind of in the Christian style and not doing it in a row, but in pieces. So
well,
I
there's
can't
there's
remember. I remember stuff, but I can't remember where it came from and so on. I've forgotten so
yeah.
much, but
And
yeah,
it's fair to say, it's fair to forget, because in the Christian style, I'm assuming you mean finding things in the New Testament and then solidifying them with things from the Old Testament, right? Or
or
like,
just devotionals where they give you, this many verses from this book. You know what I mean? Like,
mm-hmm,
you can get it all that way piecemeal.
mm-hmm,
I think
yeah.
that might have been what I did, but
And there's something to be said for that. Like you're collecting all of the themes. That's one of the
right,
things. You're like, all right,
yeah,
here's what the Bible has to say about this, and it's like all the crap that the Bible says about
there's
that.
definitely value in doing it that way. But
Yeah,
I'm just second guessing myself because I keep reading things that I don't remember or things that I remembered wrong.
yeah,
So
yeah. Okay, so that's kind of like, that's a little bit of backstory that you don't get if you're just reading the Bible, So,
right.
um, Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went to the desert of Shur. For 3 days, they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Mara, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. The word Mara means bitter. Um, and so the people were upset with Moses, like, what are we supposed to drink? Now, remember, 3 days, that's about as long as you can go without water before, bad things start to happen. Your pee turns brown.
Hmm.
Um, so, so Moses cries out to the Lord. He says, my people are thirsty. And God's like, well, just look at that wood over there, silly. And so Moses is like, right, wood. So he takes the wood, throws it into that bitter water, and the water became fit to drink. Um, the Lord then There the Lord issued a ruling and instruction for them and put them to the test. He said, if you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what's right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all of his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. So is he saying there that the diseases, are those the plagues?
I would assume so. Yeah, you know, but it's also not saying that I'm not going to do it. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's exactly right. Like
Yeah.
we saw earlier that that God was willing to kill Moses whenever he was leaving Midian to go back. He was willing to
Without
kill
an
him.
explanation.
Yeah. Well, we didn't get an explanation. Zephora seemed to know what was going on.
Yeah.
But in here, he's like, "All right, I killed." Imagine that the Egyptian or the Israelites don't follow his commands and his decrees, and he just wipes them out with plagues. And he's like, well, then what was all that crap? Why did he do all that stuff to the Egyptians? You know what I mean? Like that sort of timeline exists if you're going to say something like this, like he does in verse 26, right? He's saying this could have happened. This could happen. Like you said, he did not say he wouldn't do it, you know?
Yeah.
And then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees. 12 and 70. Biblical numbers, as Richard Elliott Freeman would say. A biblical
Yep.
number. They camped there near the water.
Did you find that as absurd as I did?
Yeah, I wanted him to. Okay, so in the book Exodus by Friedman, every time he would say a number, he would say 3, 7, 40, 12, 70. He would say a biblical number, 430, a biblical number. I was
Right.
like, please pay that off. Like, why do you keep saying that?
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, there was one instance where he said not a biblical number.
Yeah, because it was like 52. It
Yeah.
was like it was a prime number. It's like, and that's because like the thing that the Torah, these are legendary tales. So all the numbers are going to be these nice round numbers. Of course, you're never going to have a specific number.
Well, yeah,
Except
and if it's what makes the number biblical other than the fact that it's in the
in the
Bible?
Bible, right? I don't know.
What's the point?
Yeah, and so whenever he kept doing that, I wanted him to tell me what you're getting at there. Like, please tell me why that matters. I get it; it's biblical, but and also he was often citing those numbers in the Bible, like whatever 12 tribes of Israel, a biblical number. Like, well, no,
Yeah.
no kidding. We're talking about the Bible. Yeah, I did find it ridiculous.
Yeah, I meant to go through, and we don't have to include this if you don't want, but I meant to go through and count all of the citations and see how many times he cited himself versus other people. I never got around to doing it, but
wow.
I noticed he cites himself a lot.
Dang it. Given that I was listening to the audiobook, I didn't get any of that. Okay. So yeah, obviously 12 springs for the 12 tribes, 70 palms for the 70 elders, the people that Joseph brought to, or that Jacob brought to Egypt to meet his son. Okay, so we're moving on to chapter 16. This is some pretty interesting thing. This is where we get the concept of manna from heaven, right? The entire Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. Now Sin here, there's no connection with like transgressions, right?
I read that it's just like a shortening of Sinai.
Right, sin, right, Sinai.
Right,
Okay,
like
good.
calling you Jeff instead of Jeffrey, that kind of
Right,
thing.
exactly. But except my name is Jefford. On the 15th day of the second month, after they had come out of Egypt, is when this happened. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. They are just pissed. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you had to bring us out into the desert, didn't you?"
With all of our sheep and everything else that we had.
We literally have all of our stuff and all these clanking pots and weapons. And so Moses didn't have to cry out at this point. They were complaining to Moses. Moses didn't have to go to the Lord. The Lord heard the Israelites. And he says to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. Bread. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they follow my instructions. On the 6th day, they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." Why would they want to do that? Why would they want to gather twice as much?
For the Sabbath.
Right.
Hey,
Yeah.
spoiler alert, it's like the next line. They talk about
they do. Dang it. Okay. I thought we were doing such a good job reading the Bible. Okay, well, why do they have to tell us that then? If we can figure it out. So Moses and Aaron went to the Israelites. In the evening, you'll know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning, you'll see the glory of God, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us, right? And again, that's not the problem, right? It's not that they believe, they're just upset. They're hungry. They're thirsty, you know? It's not that they're like, didn't you, where's this so-called God? They don't say that. And then,
Well,
go
and
ahead.
also it sounds kind of cult leaderish. Like Moses is saying, you're not complaining against me, you're complaining against God. What
Yeah,
I'm
that's
just
true.
telling you what he
Uh-huh.
says.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then, so down to 9, Moses says to Aaron, say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of God appearing in the cloud. Did you have anything? I thought you did. No,
No, not
okay,
for
so it's
that.
time
I
for
don't
a while.
understand it, but as as a literary device, it's fine.
Yeah. Um, so the Lord told Moses, he said, I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread, and then you will know that I am the Lord your God. And in that evening, quail came, and there was quail everywhere. Um, and in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp, and when the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is this? What is this frost? What are these flakes? And Moses said, it's the bread the Lord's given you to eat. This is what the Lord said. He said, everyone's to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. And the Israelites knew exactly what an omer was, and they gathered. Some gathered a lot, some gathered a little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had
So,
gathered just as much as they needed. Yes, go ahead.
so don't exert yourself. You know what I mean?
What other lesson
Just
could there be?
just grab a handful.
Yeah.
You're good.
Uh, I'm not
So
done talking
also,
about
I
the
want to
projection.
talk about it. Like it's supposed to be bread from heaven. It's the
Mm-hmm.
way it's always been put to me, but like the various places that I've been looking outside the Bible have been saying that it's there's a plant that exudes this honeydew kind of stuff that you can collect and eat, but it's only certain times of the year. So if they're supposed to be wandering for 40 years, they're not going to have it that consistently. So it's got to be something from God. But from what I understand, they have to take that and bake it into bread. Like I don't know if that's supposed to be the leaven that they didn't take when they left, Egypt, or if that's supposed to be the bread. They have to like work it into a dough and then bake it. I don't understand how that works, but it's interesting.
Yeah. So, like you said, the people that didn't gather enough had plenty. People who gathered too much also didn't. They gathered too much, and so they didn't need to use the extra, right?
And maybe the people with the extra are donating it to the people that didn't gather very much.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds pretty socialist to me, but sure.
But also, you were given a specific task. You were told to gather this specific amount, 1 omer.
Right.
And so, does
Yeah.
that mean that an omer is fluid? It's whatever that omer means. That 1 omer is exact. 1 omer per person is exactly how much you need. Like however much you need is, that's an omer, right?
No, I can't remember where I read it, but I believe it was a Egyptian unit of measurement specifically for bread. I think like an omer was uh, the mold that they bake their bread in. It's a cone shaped mold. I could be wrong. It's been like a month since I looked into it. But
Well, I can help you here, so I can disambiguate what an omer is right now.
okay, good.
An omer is 1/10 of an ephah,
Okay, yeah, you're right.
right?
Absolutely.
So also an ephah, but an ephah, if you're like, what's an ephah? An ephah is 72 logs, which is 1/60th of a maris. Thus, an omer is 3/25ths of a maris. Okay, and a maris is equal to a light royal talent, not an entire royal talent, but a light royal talent. Thus, an omer is equal to 0.96 U.S. gallons. So basically, a gallon of these flakes.
Yeah.
Okay, except the Jewish Study Bible I was looking at says that an omer is equal to 0.61 U.S. gallons, so a little bit more than half. So it's pretty clear, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like zero point 0.9 gallons sounds like a lot, but if that's all you're eating, throughout the day until
Uh-huh.
the quail come at night, that's. I could probably eat a gallon of bread, especially if
So,
I'm wandering.
Okay, I've got some more disambiguation. I want to read it because it's so funny. This comes from the Eruvine midrash. 1/10 of an ephah. The ephah equals 3 seahs, and the seah equals 6 kavs, and the kav equals 4 logs, and the log equals
Didn't
six
we run
eggs.
in? Didn't we run into a Saya when? Uh,
Rachel was getting
exactly.
Rachel. Rachel, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
No,
I
no, it was Sarah. Sarah
Sarah.
when Sarah was finding out she was going to be pregnant at 100. That's
Oh.
when the
Yes.
guys
Take
came
three
down the
seahs
road.
of bread. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Excellent.
Yeah. Good job. Okay. So the log equals 6 eggs. Hence, an ephah equals 3 times 6 times 4 times 6, or 432 eggs, which is to say the space displaced by 432 eggs. Um,
That's a lot.
you'd think it's a chicken egg, but there's quail everywhere. Maybe it's quail
Yeah.
eggs. That's about half as much, I'd say. Probably.
It's a lot.
We find that 1/10 of an ephah equals 43 and 1/5 eggs. This is the amount of challah, the minimum amount of flour that requires a separation of challah, and for meal offerings. So that's what the Eruvine says about what an ephah and what an omer is. So
I mean,
perfectly clear.
yeah, sounds
Okay.
like a lot, but
Yeah.
you're hot in the desert. Just being that hot takes a lot of energy. It's like riding in a car. It takes a lot out of you, even though you're just sitting there.
Yeah, that's true. Driving a car, especially. The Israelites did as they were told, so we've already gone over that. And then Moses says to him, "No one is to keep any of this until morning." However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They stopped caring after they got fed. They kept part of it until the morning, and it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry. Each morning, everyone gathered as much as they needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, 2 omers. And the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He said, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is the day of yeah. That's so you said what they said. It's Sabbath tomorrow, so we need to do all that work today so that we don't have to do it tomorrow. We can't. We're not allowed to. Save whatever's left and keep it until morning. So that's like another. Isn't that kind of another miracle? The fact that
Yeah, yeah.
So the omer they gather. They're supposed to gather an omer, but what they did is they all went out because they don't know what the heck an omer is. They gathered as much as they needed. Right. Then those that saved what they had left over turned into maggots. It was trashed, right? It got rotten. Except for they made double as much on Saturday, say,
Hmm.
and it survived to the next day. So that is God, right? Doing that.
Yeah, gotta be.
Okay, I want to make sure
Yeah,
that we acknowledge God's presence.
miracle within a miracle.
Yeah, there you go. Nevertheless, some people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they didn't find any. There was no flakes. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone's to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out. So they rested on the 7th day. Interesting here how Moses is speaking for himself. He's like, I said this. Why are you? And I bring it up now because later Jethro is going to admonish him for doing just that.
Well, it says the Lord said to Moses. It's not Moses saying to the people. It doesn't even say that Moses said to the people. It just says the Lord said to
Oh,
Moses.
okay, you're absolutely right. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Yes, you're right." Okay, I'm sorry. So forget that. Um, and so he says, the Lord says to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath." Why not I? Why is it the Lord? Um,
Because it's written by guys.
right. Yeah. Interesting.
It's just dudes.
Yeah. Um, so the people of Israel called the bread manna. It was white like coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. That sounds pretty good, actually. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt." And so Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it. Then place it before the Lord to be kept for the generations to come." As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron put the manna with the tablets of the covenant law so that it might be preserved. So we're talking
What
about the Ark of
tablets?
it. Yeah, exactly.
What
Hold on.
tablets?
What are we talking
Where is it?
about?
What's this ark?
Yeah, exactly. Uh, the Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. Now that's interesting. Interesting that they said that, because that's the verse 35. The Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they came to a land that was settled. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. That's the kind of thing that snarky people like you and me would pull out of this. Like, would they do eat manna for 40 years? And the Bible's like,
Yeah,
yes, yes, they did.
yeah, yeah.
Like, they
Also,
survived.
also an omer is a tenth of an eighth. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Verse 36.
yeah.
We can assume then. So we got 2 million people wandering through the desert. They never wandered through a settled territory where they could pick up, they could trade. You know what I mean? What if they had some manna, this bread, right? And they were
Mm-hmm.
like, "Can we give you this for some goat or something?" You know what I mean? Like they had to eat this for 40 years. And that, again, interesting that the Bible would explicitly say that, but also, since we have to pull something out of it, I wonder if there's anything to be said for the fact that they must not have gone through any settled territory.
Yeah, yeah.
What was there anything else? Is there anything else you wanted to cover before we move on? I'm looking at your notes.
I don't
Oh yeah,
think
you were talking
so.
about. Go ahead.
Yeah, we can cover that if you want. So the Catholic Bible that I've been reading some of this from says that it's the tamarisk tree that's
Mm-hmm.
in this area all over the Sinai Peninsula, and I think it's in Midian, which is
Mm-hmm.
where I think if this was going to be a real thing, that's where they would have been, and not the Sinai Peninsula. But basically, that when it gets too much salt for some reason, this tree can excrete it, and I don't know where the salt's coming from necessarily, but that there's insects that feed on it and produce a honeydew, like an aphid kind of situation, and that might have been what this manna was. But that's where I was getting at, where the only certain times of the year is when those insects are active. So that really can't have been it if they're surviving on it for 40 years and they're collecting it every day but Saturday. So I don't know. There's lots of speculation around this, and most of it kind of detracts from it being a miracle. Like they're trying to find explanations for it. Can't you just take, if you're taking all this on faith, why can't you take that too? You
Well,
know?
because you need to prove that it happened. Like there, you know what I mean. Faith alone isn't enough. You know, like you can't. You could say anything. You need to have proof, right? Like if I was going to ask for why do you think this, and someone were just to say because I have faith, I believe it. You know, that's not convincing anybody, right?
Yeah, but I think most of the convincing that this kind of apologetic look does is more to reinforce the faith of the believers already. Like
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen anything really that has convinced me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I don't know what else to I don't know what else to take from that, except that yeah, like I don't know. If I wanted to believe in this stuff, if there was something I wanted to hang my hat on and say, okay, this is the one thing that kind of puts me over the top. It's not going to be the fact that we have a scientific basis for manna. You know, we were the archaeological evidence for the Exodus, things like that. None of that. That would be cool. That would be neat, and it would be like, okay, there really were a wandering tribe here, and
It would
they
be a step towards belief.
right. And sometimes it's not one solid piece of evidence, but several small pieces of evidence that
Hmm.
are enough to convince somebody of something. But as we're going to see in later chapters of Exodus, God is willing to do. He's willing to speak directly to people. He's already done it here, but he's willing later, whenever all of this grumbling is happening, to be like, okay, here I'm pulling back the curtain, Wizard of Oz style, right? And I just I don't see why we can't have that now. I've asked that question of believers, and they'll say things like, "Well, you're not looking. You're not you don't see the signs, things like that."
Hmm.
And I'm like, that's me coming to God, right? Like
Yeah.
the steps, not just physically but logically, that I have to take in order to do that precludes me finding any null hypothesis or negative hypothesis, or null answer or negative answer. That's me assuming that there is a God there. If
Hmm.
God exists and wants me to know him or it, what signs do I have to give, like outside of what I'm currently doing here, right? I've given you all the signs. Like, what am I doing? if you can harden Pharaoh's heart, you can soften someone else's, right?
Yeah.
So give me evidence that there was really manna. Show me how this tree can excrete these things during certain times of the year in certain parts of the world, and it could very well be that you can make bread out of it or whatever. Like that again, like you said, that helps. But is that what we're is that the thing that is our sticking point? You know, I don't believe it because this damn manna. What is this? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I
So
don't know.
let me do this.
Okay,
I'll put on my interviewer hat.
okay,
Before we talked about uh, kind of my uh, what happened with my belief, how I came to it, and stuff like that, and how I rejected it as a child. Let's do you. Can you give me kind of a background on where, what got you here, and not the specific thing that got you working on this project of reading the Bible with me, but just in life generally, your take on faith and how it evolved. You know what I mean?
yeah. So why am I here? I often ask myself that, like, uh, what got me here? A lot of people believe these things, and I have a sympathy for people, and I want to know what they're talking about. So that's why I'm doing this, right? More or less. But
Mm-hmm.
as for what drives me, like what compels me to want to do those things, I guess I, like most people, wonder what the if there's something greater. I often feel a connection to other people and to things. I sense that there's some sort of like connective thing happening, call it a vibration or whatever. And I wonder what it is. And 2.5 billion people say that this is it. So that's part of why I'm doing it, right? I want to show that I'm doing what I can to get there. But at the same time, I want there to be some recognition in society or whatever by everyone that we're all the same. And it's kind of not fair to dump it all into a holy book saying, here's why it is. I'm not saying, I'm being half facetious, half kind of just using that as a shorthand, but we're investigating whether or not that is the case, whether or not this is the thing, this project that we're doing, the Bible, whatever. Aside from that, I don't know. I guess that's all I have to. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, yeah. I just wanted, like I said before, I kind of got into my backstory when it comes to the, how I relate to the Bible and faith and everything else.
Uh-huh.
Of course, I haven't told my whole story. I don't doubt that I ever will, but I just thought maybe it'd be interesting to get your take on it. Where you're
Hmm.
coming from.
See, dude, I hate talking about this stuff because I don't think I have anything important to say whatsoever. We're barely scratching the surface. But I've had people say to me that we've done more reading on the Bible than most Christians they know. You know. Now I will say this, and I think I mentioned this before. I have gained an extreme amount of understanding and appreciation for believers since I've started this. I'm I'm getting exactly what I wanted out of this, if nothing else. Like
Mm-hmm.
I said when on our first podcast, or maybe our at some point, I said that I want to see if I'm a believer at the end of this thing.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be very neat. But really, what I'm hoping to get is a greater understanding of people, of humanity, right? And I think I'm getting that, and that's been very edifying, and that's helped push me to continue to read this.
Mm.
So things like that have me. It encourages me to continue to press on at times. Now, granted, this isn't that bad. You're right. Leviticus is supposed to be just insane. Um, but things like the recognition that I've gained for other people, the conversations I've had because of what I've read, that's been tremendous. I wouldn't change a thing about the way I've done any of this because of that.
Right.
Um, so I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
I think
I was just gonna say I'm getting definitely a much greater understanding and respect for the Jewish position coming out
mhm,
of this, and that having Rabbi on cemented that. I'm not being swayed towards faith in any way, but it is giving me a broader perspective that I really enjoy.
hmm.
Uh,
And see, we've come to these little conclusions and revelations about the like what we're reading, and we're only halfway through the second book. So
Yeah.
it's pretty good. Hopefully, whenever we start to get into the stories of the people, like they say that the first person like the first person in the chronology of the Bible that we have archaeological evidence for is David.
Mm-hmm.
So once we start getting into the people that actually have put footprints into the dirt, that's going to be even more interesting. You know what I mean?
That's going to be
that's
more
what
interesting, but so much more complex. Trying to separate the actual historicity from
the
the
legend.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that it's exciting to me. It's tickling my fancy in the way that the occult stuff did when I was a kid. It's the hidden knowledge, and this is there's so much of it that it needs interpretation, and how it is interpreted, you can't have it be right or wrong, but you draw conclusions from it, and then you draw conclusions from that, and it just branches out like a tree, or roots or whatever, and finding the little nodes is it's a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I often struggle with whenever I'm planning on what I'm going to talk about on these things, how I'm going to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
With do I just call out the stuff that doesn't make sense, or do I actually want to do we want to get, because that's the easy part.
Yeah,
It's easy.
that's why I've done it so much up to this point, because it's just so easy.
But finding the nodes, as you put it, the things that on which so many different interpretations can hinge. That's really fun. That's
Yeah.
I call it, it's edifying. It's rewarding. It's so fun to stumble upon something and be like, oh, like this all makes sense. Have you ever watched a movie or read a book that draws inspiration from something you haven't seen or read, and then you go back and read the source material? That's kind of like what this is. I remember I watched all these, I'm a child of the 90s. I watched all these, bad, drug movies like Blow, for example.
Yeah.
And one similar to that. And then as an adult, I watched Scarface. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, they're just doing Scarface.
Yeah.
So anyway, and Scarface is probably drawing on something else, but I don't know, man. Anyway, is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we close shop here?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. That being the case, I'm not sure if any of this is going to stay in. It's so embarrassing for me to talk about it like that.
Yeah.
Plus, I'm very ineloquent, so I just hate having to listen. Just listening back to this is going to make me cringe.
That's why you're editing it and not me.
Yeah. So I guess, in that being the case, we shall close it up here at the end of chapter 16, and we will start the next episode discussing Exodus 17, when Moses smacks the rock and water comes forth. And until such time, I am Jeff.
I'm Chris.
And this has been Eating the Apple.
Oh, I got a call. I'm getting another call.